Hello, everybody, and welcome, and good morning. My name is Pamela Schure, and I'm the Director of Products and Services at 280 Group. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm just going to switch over. Hold on one second. There we go. Things are certainly moving fast for all of us at 280 Group, and all of us even across the world. And what we want to do is help people meet these challenges head on. And so we've been listening to what the PM community has wanted and decided that the best way to do this is to create a great space of community and learning for us all. Today, we'll be covering some tips for increasing your influence as a product manager at your company. And while this is focused on women, I think the tips and tricks in this presentation are useful for just about anybody. To join me, I've asked Linda Thompson, who is the executive coach at L2LQ Leadership Development, and she is in Los Altos, California, and I'm in, well, it says San Jose. I'm in Cupertino. Fair enough. And now let's make sure that we go through some housekeeping items for this webinar. After this webinar, continue to stay engaged with the product management community. Now more than ever, get connected with your peers by joining our LinkedIn group. Join other groups and use it as a forum for getting some learning together. So hold on, let me hit the return key here, and you should start seeing a link on how to join our LinkedIn group.
And Pam, I'm Roger Snyder, VP of...
Oh, sorry, I forgot. VP of Marketing. He's here to help us out. And he's in Scotts Valley, so he's over the hill, as we call it from here.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm going to excuse myself for a moment, but I'll be back in a minute.
Okay. All right. At 280, so during the webinar, if you have any questions, please put them into the question window. We know there's a chat window, but we want you to focus on the question window. And we love interacting with our fans. So please make sure to keep them going as we go along with the webinar. And when we get to the end, we'll have a Q&A. And we'll be able to answer as many questions as possible. Depending on how many questions, sometimes we have to answer them afterwards. One very important question is, can I watch this webinar later? And the answer is yes. All attendees will receive a link so that they can view the webinar later. Maybe you could share it if you find that there are some things that are of importance to other people you know. Let's focus on today's agenda. So first of all, I'm going to introduce a little bit about 280 Group and what we do, and then we'll go over what you can expect from our product leadership webinar series. And then after that, Linda and I are going to have a conversation. So I'm going to start talking about what happens for women product managers, or actually any product managers, and Linda's going to help us figure out how can we improve the situation. So at 280 Group, our mission is to empower product managers to do great product management and product marketing, and especially become product leaders. We do that with our methodology and framework, the optimal product process, and it was designed by senior product leaders with a combined 150 years experience. It's been used across the world for many different situations, and it's a powerful framework that works for products in any industry at any stage of the life cycle, and with any development methodology, whether you're using Agile or Waterfall. The optimal product process is only one pillar of how 280 Group helps companies and individuals transform their product teams around the world. Make sure that you continue to learn after this webinar and download the optimal product process ebook in our free resources. I'll tell you what, check it out. We have a lot of free resources that should help you no matter what you're doing or where you are in your career. Okay, so for today, we're very happy to bring you another installment in our webinar series this morning. As a reminder, we spoke with your peers to uncover priorities of product leaders and want to improve their product teams. Our ultimate goal is to help you and your teams build on the great products that matter. So today, our theme, we're focusing on professional development as a PM leader, and it's going to be awesome. Today's audience, we're pleased that a lot of product managers have joined us. Well, I guess that makes sense, because this really is oriented towards product managers as opposed to their managers and above them in management. We got some product owners and a bunch of other. And I would say for anybody here that these are tips that are useful for anybody, no matter where they are in their career. So to help us out, let's introduce Linda Thompson. Linda is an executive coach and a leadership consultant, and she works with a lot of companies here in Silicon Valley. She draws on more than 20 years experience as a corporate vice president and director of human resources. She's responsible for multiple areas of talent management and leadership and organizational development. As a matter of fact, should I say this? But I've known Linda for over 20 years in an old capacity. So there we go. But I think she's awesome. In her consulting practice, L2LQ Leadership Development, she gives her clients the feedback they need, not necessarily what you want to hear, but they need to increase their effectiveness, leverage their strengths, and build self-awareness in how their behavior impacts others. She excels at helping high potential leaders create new possibilities and achieve breakthroughs in their goals, relationships, and team dynamics. So there's her contact details. And by the way, there's a special offer she'll be talking about towards the end. So I'm very excited. So we'll see. You should stay tuned for that. So my point here is, before I turn it over to Linda, what I really want to talk about is, how did we end up here? As product managers, someone sold us this deal that we were going to be wonderful. And we have this executive role, and it's really important to running the company. In other words, there's the CEO, the senior executives, the general managers. Guess what? We're also extremely influential in the company. Wonderful. But how come it's so hard? First of all, we're in this great position in that pretty much everybody knows us. People around the company all recognize our contribution, sometimes with a few swear words in front of it, which is fair enough. But we have to move the product forward. We have to make sure that we get the development team on board to make sure that they deliver what the customers are telling us they want and what we see as the future of the company. There's a lot of things that we're doing and a lot of people we're interacting with. However, when we work through a process model, although we have to attend a session or get to the next gate, and we have to get agreement as to what the content of deliverables is, the real question and the real source of our influence is how we deliver this, okay? How we make sure that our message really gets there. How do we get agreement? And especially, how do you get agreement when you don't have implicit authority, when most of you don't really have people that that are reporting to you? So this is a model that we sometimes use here, which is, first, when we started being product managers, we got pretty good at managing ourselves. We had a lot of work to do. We had to make sure we had skills and attitude. We held ourselves accountable. Later on, we directed people in the way that our team was going to move forward. And we had to develop some systems and everything else. And ultimately, as we grow into our careers, we want to make sure that we use our passion and our drive to determine the direction of the products and to drive their business and strategy and influence everybody towards a goal. Because remember, although we might be leading others, we probably don't have anybody reporting to us either. So to do that, we have to have a very, very deep understanding of people. And boy, we meet a lot of people every day. We meet a ton of people. And every time we talk to them, we're encouraging them to change direction. And it turns out, as human beings, we love doing the same thing over and over again for many of us. But when we have to tell people to change direction, it generates stress in them. And it becomes very difficult for them to actually listen to what we have to say. And honestly, there's a lot of numbers games here, which is we as individuals are facing much larger organizations. We'll be in a room and there'll be many more people, or a room or a virtual space, whatever we are in today. And there's a numbers game. We're just one against many. And we have a lot of people we need to convince. And each person has their own perspective on it. And it might be slightly different. And so we're going to have to use different kinds of language to convince them. So what happens when we generate stress? Well, we've all heard of the fight and flight. So what I wanted to do is talk about the different reactions that people can have. Because when Linda talks, she's going to use many of these vocabulary terms. She's going to refer to these things that we face. So understand that when you come up with change, people sometimes fight you. They want to control things. They don't want to delegate to you. They want to make sure that they develop those plans together. And they want to have credit. Like, I did this. And sometimes they can get mad. And they can use sarcasm in a way that's not very comfortable for any of us. The other one is People might avoid it. They might be critical. What do you know you're talking about? You don't know anything. They might hesitate because they're uncertain. What happens if I'm wrong? And they might focus more on how the negative as opposed to the positive. How can I get some growth out of this? And they might find it difficult to interact with their own emotions. And as a result, they dismiss yours or they dismiss anybody else's, right? This is a factual conversation, right? It isn't factual. There is always emotion involved, but they don't want to address it. And finally, we have people who are going to freeze and hide themselves. And they'll just say, yes, whatever so-and-so said, so I'm going to just agree with them because I really don't want that conflict. They don't know how to have difficult conversations. And they don't maybe even have vision or care. They've been taught that the way to make progress in life is to basically hide from things. And if you change things, it's seen as criticism of them instead of being a way that we need to move forward to make a good business decision. And so these are the three aspects of issues that you're going to face when you're going to try and implement change. And Linda today is going to help us try and work it out. And so she's got this talk that she's going to give us called No Bragging Required. So Linda, go for it.
Thank you, Pam. I just want to jump right in because Pam has already introduced me. And I want to start by saying that my mother told me when I was a kid not to brag. She said it was unattractive, and if I did it, I wouldn't be liked. Now, when I was a teenager, the quickest way to get me to stop doing something was to tell me that it would make me ugly and unpopular. So believe me, this lesson really stuck, as it does with a lot of us. In fact, girls are so inundated with this kind of feedback that we even find it difficult sometimes to take compliments. You like my dress? Means this whole thing? Amy Schumer did a wonderful sketch with 4 women friends. You can find it on YouTube, I'm sure, where they just go more and more ridiculous in trying to deflect each other's compliments. So bragging is something that we're told we should not do, quite the opposite. In fact, we're told that our knowledge and our hard work will yield great results, which will yield great rewards. I've got to tell you that I learned early on in my working career that women have additional challenges besides just presenting great results. In fact, in my very first job out of school, I was walking down a hallway, 22 years old, walking down a hallway. Coming in the opposite direction was the only other person in the hall was a man. He was a director. I was brand new. And as I was approaching him, I was looking down at the papers in front of me, probably concentrating on those. So as he approached me, all of a sudden he said, "Smile." And I, startled, looked up, gave a little smile, and each of us went on our own way. I'm sure, and he was a nice guy, I'm sure he never thought about that incident for one more second, but it haunted me. I was embarrassed. I was humiliated by the whole thing, and all I could think of was, if I were a guy, he never would have said that to me. So I realized that I was going to be judged not just on my results, but on a whole lot of other things, including whether I smiled or not. Now, after telling that story, I always want to make sure that I say that this talk that I'm going to give is not going to be male bashing. In fact, although the studies that I cite and the stories that I'm going to tell are about women, the 5 strategies I'm going to share with you can be used by anyone. I'm so glad to have Roger on the call. I hope there are other men on the call because when I've given this talk in the past, men also have come up to me afterward to tell me that they found it valuable. So this is not a male bashing conversation whatsoever. Nevertheless, I'm going to focus on some of the barriers that women in particular, but anyone not in the dominant group, may run into when you're trying to get the recognition for the great work that you do. Next slide. I've done a lot of coaching of a lot of leaders throughout the years, and this topic is important to me because much of my consulting practice focuses on developing high potential leaders below the executive level, both men and women, but sometimes especially women. Pam, let's show all of the bullets here. And these are the themes that I have found come up over and over again when I'm working with leaders at all levels. Frankly, the first three, developing your executive presence, getting influential across the organization, and managing difficult conversations, as Pam alluded to a few minutes ago, or challenging relationships, those are pretty universal. Both the male and female leaders focus on those quite often. But the other two, the last two, seem to be exclusive to women leaders. And the last one, confidence, initially really surprised me because I was working with very talented and effective leaders. But I'll tell you, recent research shows that women's lower confidence may not be innate, but may be induced by how women are treated. Because if you're interrupted and talked over and your ideas are ignored, those kinds of things would shake anyone's confidence. Let's go on. Pam, I can't hear you.
Sorry, we recently did a panel, and in the panel, one woman shared a story of how she refused a promotion because she didn't feel that she had the right skills for it. And it turned out that she did have those skills.
We're going to talk about that in a few minutes.
Yeah.
So here's a Dilbert cartoon I'm going to read quickly. Alice says, your project failed because there were no women on the team. Women have better communication skills. Every study shows that. Are you listening? And Dilbert says, outwardly, yes. Haven't we all experienced the frustrations that Alice is delivering here? Let's look at some of the barriers that we face, everybody faces, to getting our accomplishments recognized. Next slide. Next slide, Pam.
Oh, do you have it? It should have shown up.
I don't see
barriers. Okay, hold on.
There it is. Okay, great.
It showed up? Okay, yeah, it's a little bit of a delay. Sorry.
That's fine. So there are, we've already talked about the childhood no-no as a barrier to getting our accomplishments recognized. We don't like people who toot their own horns. We judge them as arrogant. The competitive nature of business and things like our reward systems. If I'm a manager and I have a 4% budget for merit increases and I want to give one of my team more than 4%, it means someone else is going to get less than 4%. It reinforces a win-lose mentality. Everybody is really busy, and these days we're busy even with more challenges than normal. And so it's hard to even pay attention to other people's accomplishments, even if you're their manager. With the fast pace of business these days, it really causes forgetfulness. It's like, oh, you did that 2 weeks ago? Well, what have you done for me lately? Let's look at some a poll that Pam is going to show you where you can identify additional barriers to getting your accomplishments recognized.
Okay, so you should start seeing a poll come up in a moment. So I think these have all happened to all of us where we've been interrupted or talked over in a meeting. I don't know, having your idea ignored till a man says something similar could be.
Pam, let's not even talk through these. Let's just let people vote on them.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I see some votes coming in here. There's some pretty high ones. Wow, okay. One of these polls is coming in, and it's coming in really high, stunningly high. I'm just astounded. Actually, they're all coming in pretty high. Good questions there, Linda. Sure. All right. Do we, are we done with the poll?
Yeah. Let's
okay. Okay. Yeah, I can close it and let me share that with everybody.
Wow.
Wow, right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, these are some of the issues I'm going to touch on in our time together today. So I'm glad that they are relevant to you.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get right into it, huh?
All right, let's go. All right, let me come back over here and keep moving.
Okay, so what I know for sure is you can overcome the barriers to being appropriately recognized and rewarded for your great work. It's not going to happen by osmosis, so you have to be deliberate about it. And from my years of working with leaders at all levels, I've identified 5 strategies that seem to make a big difference. I'm going to review them really quickly now, and then I'm going to go into detail about each one of them. This first one, master your job, I know that sounds obvious, but it's got to be said, because if you're going to have your accomplishments recognized, you've got to have accomplishments. So get that really good at your job. If you want it, go for it. This takes courage. You can do it by building support. Number 3, finding your balance is about the dilemma that we face about how to be both respected and liked in the workplace. Cultivate a powerful presence. We're going to talk a little bit, developing your executive presence is a much deeper topic, but I do want to give you something that you can use right away. And finally, I'm going to share with you a tool that will help you communicate your impact without having to brag. So let's get into it. Okay, Charlotte Whitten is not only the former mayor of Ottawa, she was the first woman mayor of Ottawa. And what Charlotte Whitten said was, whatever women do, they must do twice as well as men to be thought half as good. Luckily, this is not difficult. Now, normally this gets a laugh, and I'm sure you're all laughing because it is funny, but the implications are exhausting. You shouldn't have to be twice as smart, twice as capable, twice as effective, but subtle, unrecognized, and often unintentional gender bias still exists. I want to illustrate it by sharing with you a study that was done at Yale University a few years ago. It was done with 100 STEM professors, both male and female, participated in this study where they were given a resume, not for a professor, but for someone who wanted to be a laboratory manager. And these 100 professors they all got the exact same resume, except half of them got a resume from someone named John and half got a resume from someone named Jennifer. They were asked to evaluate the resume and to decide whether it was good enough to bring this person in for an interview, how much they would tend to pay this person based on the resume, and whether they would be willing to mentor the person who was represented by this resume. And what they found was that the male and female STEM professors were much more likely to bring John in for an interview. They were willing to pay him thousands of dollars more, thought he was worth thousands of dollars more than Jennifer. And they were also much more willing to mentor those professors who had John's resume rather than those professors who had Jennifer's resume. And I want to emphasize there were both male and female professors in both groups.
Yeah, that's the part that I find amazing. That's amazing.
It is amazing.
It is stunning.
Yeah. And in fact, the professors, when they were shown the results of this study, they were horrified. I mean, these are people in STEM. They're scientists and mathematicians. These are people who focus on data and facts, and were just so upset that they exhibited this kind of unconscious bias. So the people who did the study at Yale did it again with 100 different STEM professors. But what they did differently this time was before they shared the resume with them, they did some training, awareness training on unconscious bias. And the good news is that the second time, the results were much more equal. So awareness and training can help, but unconscious bias runs really deep in all of us. If you took a look at the blog post that accompanied this or previewed this workshop, you'll see some examples of that I don't want to take the time to go into right now. But let's move on.
Well, before we do this, I want to just cover this from the PM perspective and make sure that, you know, as a product manager, we're always thinking, am I good enough technically to do my job, right? And the truth of the matter is sometimes it's hard to be, you know, really on top of every single little detail. And so, yes, we have to master it technically. We also have to master the marketing side as well. And so mastering your job in our context is incredibly difficult, right? Even to do it at a low level, it's very difficult.
Yeah, very true.
But what I appreciate about what the 280 group focuses on here, though, is that it's not just the technical aspects of the discipline that you focus on, but also the interpersonal and leadership aspects. So important. So we're told that our knowledge and our skills and our great attitude will be enough for get our results recognized, but we find that it may be necessary but insufficient because of the unintentional unconscious bias for anyone who is not. I don't know what that is. But what I want to say is that the John and Jennifer study shows that awareness and training can help, but let's look at what else we can do, okay? So sometimes we get in our own way. A study that was done by the Society for Human Resource Management a couple of years ago showed that men tend to apply for jobs and for promotions when they have about 60% of the qualifications that are listed in the job specification, where women tend to wait until we have 100% of those listed qualifications before we apply. And when they don't apply, men don't do it because they don't want to waste their time. where women say they're not applying because they're following the rules, you know, that says that these are required, and because they don't want to fail. So I have a dirty little secret from my years in human resources to share with all of you. Job postings list impossible criteria. They list everything the former incumbent did really well and everything the manager wished that incumbent had done really well. So, Pam, did you have an example of this too to share?
Well, actually, I did, because I remember that I was asked to interview someone who was applying for a position, and I interviewed this guy, and my boss said, well, what'd you think? And I said, well, I could do just as well as he could. And he said, you should apply for it. And I said, well, I'm pregnant. And bless him, he knew me really well. And he said, well, when do you do? I said, I'm due in May. And he said, well, business planning ends in March. You should be fine. And that's what I did. And so I applied for the position, and I got it. I mean, I obviously knew the company much better than this other candidate did. And I did very well in that position. And but it was a shock, and I had a lot to learn. And I spent the next sort of 3 years learning how to do that job. It was incredibly exciting and incredibly challenging. And luckily, yeah, there you go. But I got it. I did it. Yes.
I want to reinforce something that you just said, which is the next 3 years you learned how to do the job. Because if you apply to a job when you have only 60% of the required qualifications and you get it, that's where you learn. And a lot of us learn really fast, and we learn once we're plunged into the job. So don't wait until you have 100% of the qualifications. The most they can say to you is no. If it's something you really want, go for it. The bottom line is, don't let insecurity or your need to be perfect or your fear of failing hold you back. And if if you want to get practice with interviewing, because that's one of the skills, those are the muscles that atrophy really quickly. So if you haven't been out interviewing the last year, I'd say you're probably pretty stale at it. Do what I call recreational interviewing, which I used to do when I was employed internally. If a job looked interesting to me somewhere at another company, I'd go interview for it. I'd meet nice people. I'd learn about how other HR organizations operated. I got practice at answering those tough interview questions and kept that interview muscle honed. And frankly, normally I would almost always come back to my job thinking, no, I'm better off where I am than where I was. So the other thing that happens with recreational interviewing is the stakes aren't so high. You don't go in there with thinking, life or death, I've got to get this job. So you can relax and actually have fun with it and meet really great people who you can add to your LinkedIn cohort. And so I have to tell you, I call this recreational interviewing. I told a client about it once. I'll never forget. He was a director of tax. And he said to me, recreational interviewing? You might as well tell me about recreational root canal.
Right.
So if you feel that way about interviewing,
yeah.
I understand. But it is a technique to keep you sharp for when the job or the promotion comes up that you really, really want. Okay?
I think there's another story here is sometimes I've interviewed for positions and I've not had them, but then when the next position came up, they knew I was interested. And so I always got the second time, right? So, yep. So just keep going for it, because it doesn't happen the first time as in many other stories. I don't know, Roger, did you have anything from your hiring experience of?
Yeah, so Linda's right. As a hiring manager of over 17 years, you're always creating a job description that is the ideal candidate, right? If this person could walk on water, that would be awesome, right? So You don't need 100%, that's for sure. And you know, a lot of the best employees that I've hired over the years are the folks who showed more in the earlier slide, the attitude circle of, I don't know this, this, and this, and they're honest about it. That's the other thing is, don't try to pretend you're skilled at things that you're not, but be honest about your attitude and your experience and your desires. And that's going to be a big part of what could make the difference in why you should be hired, because you've shown that excitement to want to learn these that maybe you have a less strength in.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this balance that we're talking about here is not work-life balance, although heaven knows that's important, especially these days for people with kids at home. But this reflects the narrower band of acceptable behavior for anyone not in the dominant group. Women in particular, there's a finer line of acceptable behavior, which I like to call the Goldilocks syndrome. You can see Goldilocks on your screen. It means you're either to this or to that, but never just right. For women, often you're either perceived as too cold or too nurturing. Either you drive too hard for results, or you're someone that they want to work with, but they don't respect. You're too tough. If you're too tough, no one likes you. But if you're too nice, no one respects you. So the challenge is how to be both respected and liked. How to drive for results and be someone that they want to get results with. I want to illustrate this with another study. This one was done at Harvard in their MBA program. So you may know that Harvard uses case studies extensively in their MBA education. This was a study that was done describing the career of a woman named Heidi Roizen, who you may be familiar with. She's a Silicon Valley luminary. She's done everything. She's been an executive. She's been a CEO. She's been a board member. She's been a venture capitalist. She's done it all successfully. They handed out the case study about her career to everyone, and it was identical for everyone. And again, these were male and female MBA students. The only difference, again, in the case studies is that half of them were for Heidi Roizen and half of them were for someone called Howard Roizen. The good news is that the male and female MBA students deemed both Heidi and Howard to be equally competent. The bad news came when they were asked, would you want to work for this person? Because the very qualities described in the case that encouraged the MBA students to describe Howard as results-oriented, decisive, with high standards, caused them to describe Heidi as demanding, pushy, and selfish. I want to reiterate, they got the same case, except for the first name. So those very qualities in leaders who were, for men, were described as results-oriented, decisive, high standards. I'd love to work for him. For a woman, were characterized as demanding, pushy, selfish, and shrill. It was, again, horrifying to see those results. And again, those are not just the male students. The female students reacted exactly the same way. This unconscious bias is deeply unconscious for all of us.
In everyone, yeah.
In fact, when I was, I have a story to illustrate the same thing. When I was in my first management job, I was interviewing people to join my team, and my manager, who was a man, was also interviewing them. We were using behavioral interviewing. So we were using rapid fire questions, identical questions for everybody, and what was called a neutral face. So we didn't let the candidate know whether their answer was a good answer or not a good answer. And we started getting some really interesting feedback back through my existing team about how people were reacting and why some of them were really ambivalent about going forward with the interview process. What we heard was they thought what they said about Patrick, my manager, was, wow, he is really tough. I could learn a lot from him. And what do you think they said about me? They said, I wouldn't work for that bitch for $1 million.
Wow.
Well, you don't know me, but I am 5'0", weighing under 100 pounds. I am not an intimidating presence. And when I heard those reactions, I just was furious. I raged after I finished raging at the unfairness of it all. I realized that I couldn't change other people, that all I could do was change myself. So what I did in this circumstance was I decided to warm up the interview a little bit. So instead of asking machine gun style questions right away, I started by asking if they had difficulty finding us and did they want a cup of coffee. And I smiled more, and it made a huge difference. And then my challenge, of course, was to maintain control of the interview. So again, it's finding that balance that works for you. I wish I could tell you, there's a ratio, a formula for this, but everybody's got to find their own balance. Seek feedback. Welcome critical parts. Figure out how you can be both respected and liked. That's, I work with engineers, women engineering a lot, technical women in finance and engineering, and they want to know the ratio, the smile ratio, which I can't tell them. But everybody has to find. There is this thing though,
and I think, Linda, you're kind of getting to it, which is if we start out with a relatively soft up front, but then when it hits certain points, then we start hitting like the barriers. It's like the people have to see that you have barriers, right? So, I've experienced the same. I walk into a training room and I'm training a trainee, and he's a guy, and everybody walks in the room, starts talking to him. And finally I say, hi, I'm your trainer, director of products and services. And it's like the moment I do that, they switch. But I have to make sure that they make that switch, right? So I'm always looking for opportunities to do it and to just sort of assert my authority, but in a pleasant way,
You articulated something really important just there, which is it's more, I think, from my experience, it's better to start out too tough and warm things up. If you start out too warm and nurturing, it's going to be really hard to catch up and get the respect that you need to command. So that would be my advice. Let's move on. I'm aware of the time. We have a lot of coverage.
We keep talking away. Great. Okay.
This is a cartoon that you can see there are 5 people sitting in the same room in a meeting, which we don't have the luxury of doing now. The meeting leader is a man who's talking. There's only one woman. She's leaning forward with her hands folded. And the meeting leader is saying, that's an excellent suggestion, Elaine. Perhaps one of the men here would like to make it. We're all doing virtual meetings these days. And for virtual meetings, when you want to speak, I want to tell you to sit at the edge of your chair. Sit upright. It will add power to your voice. and it'll signal to others that you have something to say in the moment. For the rest of
I think the other thing I would say, and Linda, I mentioned this to you earlier. Oh, sorry. What I was saying is, Linda, I would never sit where she's sitting. I would have sat closer to the leader of the meeting. Absolutely. Take that power position. Don't give it up.
So there are a lot of things that she's doing wrong, but you know, she's been socialized that way just like the rest of us. And so while we're doing virtual meetings, sit at the edge of your seat, speak clearly. Powerful people take their time, and make sure that you have the power in your voice and will signal to others. Let's look at the next slide, because I recently came across this quote from Rebecca Solnit, who is a historian who's written on feminism, and she separates having your voice having, that she calls that vital power, into three pieces. The first of which we think about immediately, which is audibility. Can people hear you? But the second is credibility. Are people willing to believe you? And the third, consequence. Your words have an effect. So I'd have you think about all three of those when you are making a point in a meeting. Let's go on.
Yeah, and that's one of the other things that we talk about in some of the other things that we've talked about, which is try and make it quick, concise, to the point, right?
Great.
And then your final statement or request or whatever it is, I need your help, yes or no, whatever it is, but draw a conclusion. And I think that that makes a big difference for people believing that you really are making a point and you're serious about what you're talking about.
Right.
Great advice. Let's go on. Some other suggestions about how to get heard. You know, in the Obama White House, the women found that they were being talked over in meetings, they were being interrupted, and they decided to stand up for each other. And you can do that as well. Amplify the original speaker by repeating her idea and ensuring that she's recognized for it. Interrupt the interrupters. Hey, Amy was speaking. Let's hear the rest of what she has to say. I will tell you that women can do this more easily for others than they can for themselves without getting blamed for it or criticized for it. But if you can get male allies to do the same for you, then that can make a big difference if you're the only woman in a meeting. And if you don't have any male allies in the meeting, you're going to have to do it for yourself so that you can get heard. Hey, I have more to say. I wasn't finished. As I said a minute ago, to build on my last idea or my last suggestion, all of those things you can use. Don't use qualifiers when speaking. Get the word maybe, get the word just, get the words a little out of your vocabulary. I think that maybe it's a little off base, and you may have heard or thought of this, but all of that undercuts the power of what you're going to say. And regarding ending sentences on an up note, I've heard women who are very knowledgeable and very expert in their field, and I've heard them speak and end every clause on an up note instead of a down note, and it makes them sound tentative and like they don't know what they're talking about. So don't do it. This is I particularly noticed this among millennials and among Californians, but it happens everywhere. So it's something that I work on with a lot of the people that I coach, and it's really important so that you can get your voice heard. Okay?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I did something where I coached a woman to do that, and I swear that was probably the only thing she changed. And when I checked back with her, it had completely transformed her career. One thing.
Wow.
Great example.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go on. I don't know how many of you heard of power posing, but the woman on the slide is doing it. There is a Harvard professor named Amy Cuddy, Cuddy. She has a TED Talk that, if you haven't seen, is worth 20 minutes of your time. And if you have seen it, it's worth watching again. She talks about a number of, she studies power. She talks about a lot of things regarding power, but what I have found to be a very important hint for you is to do this power pose, which is also known as the Wonder Woman pose, before a presentation, before an important meeting, before an interview. Stand somewhere by yourself so people won't laugh at you, with your feet apart, heart planted firmly on the ground, your arms on your hips, your hands on your hips, your chin slightly elevated, and just stand there and breathe for 2 minutes. And I know physiologically when you're doing that, you're opening your chest, you're taking deeper breaths. It helps ground you. But I can only speak to the results of this, because I have had a woman who was a client who was being deposed. She was in a deposition representing her company. And after it was over, she called me and she said, Linda, I was really nervous at first. When that opposing counsel started asking me questions, I couldn't remember anything. I was inarticulate. It was awful. I sounded so stupid. So they called a break. I went into the ladies' room. I power posed for 2 minutes, came out, and all of a sudden, I could remember what I wanted to say. I was able to answer all his questions. I felt articulate and poised. And in 15 minutes, they said, thanks, we've got enough. And I was done. I don't know why it worked, but it was amazing, she said. So that's a dramatic example of when a power pose made a huge difference. So, just to summarize there about power posing, Amy Cuddy says, our bodies change our minds change our behavior, and our behaviors change our outcomes. It's a great thing to remember. And finally, communicate your results not by talking about the results themselves only, but by describing their impact on the business. Let's look at the next slide.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Yeah.
I want to share this with you. I don't know how many of you have to do a monthly or a quarterly report of what you've accomplished, but you can use this framework for those reports. Even if you do use it, if there's another format that you have to use, you can still use this framework. You can use it when you're reporting on your results to your manager in a one-on-one, when you're reporting on them for your performance review, or in a meeting. What often happens is when we list what we've done, we just list the what, the results. We might also talk about what we're going to do next, our next steps, but what we forget is the so what. So I did that. What will that make possible? What will that allow for? What will it enable? What difference does it make to the business? What is the so what behind, and don't assume that your manager will automatically know it, even if he or she has given you the assignment. Always connect your results to what it means to the business. If you've solved a customer problem, so what? What will they buy more? Will the company have a better reputation? Will you be able to tell engineering about this problem so that you can, so it can be resolved, so it never happens again? As close as you can get to either making the company money or saving it money, you may have to ask yourself this so what question a couple of times until you get there. But it's where all the power is. So Pam,
and that's what you're example? Yeah, I mean, I used to have this other example, and again, you can use this in many formats. So I used to often see the CEO of this one company, and he would come by. He had to come by my desk for a variety of reasons, and I would always say, "This is what we're doing. This is what we're doing next, and this is what you're going to get for it." And when it came time to asking for another job and a bigger promotion, it was like he knew what I had done. He knew what I could do for the company, and he was behind it. So the more you can build us in, and I would actually say the more frequently you can talk about this stuff, but you don't have to talk about it endlessly. You just have to talk about it appropriately, you know?
Exactly.
So there's that part of finding that balance, I think. I'm going to move us on a little bit because we're going to run out of time for questions. Yeah.
Right. I want to keep going. A client of mine had a boss who only started including her team's results in his reports to his boss after she began describing their impact. So, you know, we've talked about registering, leveraging impact today, but as a product manager, you have to be a leader in an influence environment, and there are a whole lot of other skills that you need to demonstrate. So I want to invite you to complete the self-assessment checklist that is going to be sent to you that has these four areas and all the skills underneath them in it. And if you want to consider how to become more effective in any of these areas, I'm offering a free consultation, 30 minutes, so that you can determine if you want to work on some of these skills right now. And if you do, whether coaching is right for you right now. But in the meantime, let's summarize. I want you to think about one bite-sized action you can take this week. I want you to get out your calendar and make an appointment with yourself to get it done. So do great work. Don't let the need to be perfect or fear of failing stop you. Maintain a balance between being liked and getting things done. Cultivate a dynamic presence and record what your results mean and make possible for the product, for your company, even for the world.
Great.
So here's your checklist. Yeah. Here's this checklist that you're offering us, which is wonderful. And that gives people the your contact details as well if they want to take you up on that half-hour free coaching. Boy, that's an awesome gift. Thank you so much. In these times, especially, we could use it. So I'm going to move on because we do have some people who've asked some questions, and I really would love to get them. We have a final poll here. Let me just put this up. I'll give you a minute to answer that, and then we'll just do the final wrap-up stuff and get to the questions. So I'm thinking, what am I going to do this week? I think I'm going to try sitting on the edge of my chair. I think that's a good one.
You know, sometimes the simplest changes just are the lever that makes the whole difference.
And by the way, that power pose is really funny. I was just thinking, so my husband is an introvert, and he had to deliver something once, and I had him doing the power pose. He had to deliver something at church, and I had him doing the power pose in the hallway behind the pulpit before he got out there. He did really well.
I'll bet it was
Made him feel a lot more comfortable. Okay, here. I am conscious of time. Let me close this up here. I think we're just about done. I'm going to go to the questions. So thank you very much for helping us know. And let's go on to some questions. So here's a good one. In a few situations, I've had managers who did not want me to connect with people on other teams. In one environment, I could not speak on conference calls. I had to pass in my questions and comments on a piece of paper, so it was impossible to build a reputation. Eventually, I left. What else could I have done? That happens. Boy, that's a scary one. Yeah.
Well, not knowing the situation, I think that leaving may have been the best thing for you to do. If it was something that you really wanted to work to change, then the best thing to do is to have a crucial conversation with someone, a difficult conversation with that manager to find out if there are alternatives, or if you could take turns. You know, sometimes everybody passes the questions to you instead of you always having to pass the questions to other people.
And I think there's this thing, yeah, Linda, and I think this is something you probably work with people. So sometimes as a manager, you have to do a quick check on yourself, right? Which is, am I speaking in a way that's convincing to other people? And you need to do that up front, right? You need to say to this person or to other people, do I not sound convincing when I talk? And if that's an issue, then work on that. And if it isn't an issue, then you need, I think, to challenge your manager and to say, what's up? How is anything going to ever get done if you're the only person everybody comes through to, right?
Yep.
So there we go. Trying to think. It says, how are behavioral and leadership tests assessed differently from men and women? I'm not sure I understand.
How are behavioral and leadership what?
Yeah, how are behavioral and leadership tests assessed differently? I'm not sure I understand. So I'm not sure if, I think it goes back to those studies that you were referring to.
Well, behaviors, there was a study that was reported in the New York Times a few months ago, really, and I think I referred to it in the blog post as well, where people were asked to draw a leader, and they almost always drew a man. So we have in our cultural consciousness this concept of leader as male. And it's really tough. But I want to share with you something wonderful that I saw, a Forbes article from this week on the 13th of this month. The title of it is, what do countries with the best coronavirus responses have in common? Women leaders. Oh, you can't see
I saw that. That's awesome.
And so, you know, the more women, this is something that I have as a goal, a personal goal, is that I want to support women in leadership at every level of every kind of organization, public, private, governmental, et cetera, because I believe that when women represent at least 50% of all leaders everywhere, we will be living in a better world.
Okay. We ran out of time a little bit, and I know that there's a really important question here I'm going to leave people with, which is it ever appropriate to challenge the person who absconds with your idea? So if you put up with an idea and someone else repeats it, is it appropriate to say, well, actually, I came up with that idea first? Or is that considered too much?
And you will be criticized for it, but you've got to do it. You've got to learn how to do it effectively. That's the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good.
And making a joke can really help.
I like the joke.
You can do it with humor. It will be great.
Okay, wonderful.
That it?
Okay, we have like two. Yeah, we have to stop. We have other questions. We'll talk about what we're going to do to respond. what I wanted to suggest is join us next week on Friday. We have an AI PMM webinar, and it's a co-hosted webinar, and it has, I love this title, by the way, Roger, which is 9 Tools to Know Thine Enemy. What a great title. And we'll have Susanna Axelrod on. She's a consultant, and she's been, she has a superb resume as well. So go ahead and join us for that. I will put the URL into the chat window so you can have it, but please join us for that. And with that, I'm going to end the webinar, I think.
Thank you so much, Linda.
Thank you, and thank you so much, Linda, for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Great.
I really enjoyed it.
Great. I think I'm going to have to, I can't quite do everything here. So I'm going to end the webinar now, and we'll send it through in a separate email. All right. Thank you very, very much, everybody. Bye.
Have a great day. Thank you.
Bye.